Hi there. Welcome back to Zen Gen Pet Specialist. We are back today with Stephen, our cat behavior pro. Welcome, Stephen.
Nice to see you, Jen, as always.
Yes, nice to see you too. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that I know I work with a lot of clients on and would love your expertise on this because I think a lot of people, cat lovers and owners, struggle with, and that is food and diet for cats.
Right. I've been around this topic for a long time in different contexts, so I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Okay, good. So let's start with cats and what a natural diet is. Evolution. We've got Jenny joining us again today, of course. Jenny, thank you for joining us. I'm sure
Vocally.
she'll want to tell us about what food cats like and what food cats don't like. So welcome, Jenny.
I think she's learned. I think she's learned your voice, Jen.
Is that what it is?
And
Yeah.
she. Oh, I think so. I think so.
I can hear her meowing. She's like, it's Jen. That's awesome. All right, so let's dive into this. Let's talk a little bit about a cat and
Yep.
what's a natural sort of food. If we're talking about if we go back thousands of years, how is a cat's digestive system? Let's get into that. What do they need?
Yeah, and this is kind of really the start of any discussion about cat food is what are they, what have cats evolved to eat? And cats are niche market eaters. They're not omnivores like dogs who can eat all sorts of things and stay healthy. Hi, sweetheart. Cats are carnivores, right? And they're what's called obligate carnivores, which they means that they cannot synthesize the nutrients that they need from vegetable matter. They can't combine into proteins. They need meat proteins. And what they evolved to eat basically was mice. And so, as an example, people a long time ago, people would feed cats organ meat. They just get rid of the scraps um, and not include bone in their diet. And bone is a required part of cats' food because they eat the bones of the mice and the birds,
Right.
but mostly, mice. And so if they don't get bone in their food, uh, they will become nutritionally deficient. And every cat food, every commercial cat food on the market has either bone or bone meal or the equivalent of the calcium and maybe related nutrients that they get from bone. So the mouse is mostly protein and fat. And interestingly, the carbs that a cat gets from a mouse is the partially digested. This is going to be gross. The partially digested, spoiler alert or trigger warning, partially digested stomach contents of the mouse's stomach. And this is really important because cats lack amylase, which is the enzyme in their mouth or our mouths that starts the digestive process on vegetables. And cats lack that. And so they actually rely on the mouse to get a jump on that. And
Oh,
so for this reason, the mouse is the perfect food. It's the right proportion of fat and protein with bone and slightly digested vegetable matter. So it's perfection.
wow.
And that's kind of the basis of what good cat food is. Good from the point of view of the cat who evolved to eat this. That there are such specific uh, eaters that there's actually a, some teeth in the cat's mouth that is designed to break the vertebrae of a mouse's spine. It fits like lock and
Mm,
key.
wow.
So they exist together in nature. And if we deviate from that too far, then we risk making our cats sick. We can't have vegetarian cats. That would be a disaster nutritionally. Cat would get seriously sick. Um,
Mm,
and so, the pet food industries have worked to regulate a portion of ingredients to be within that sort of framework of what a mouse is. But what they don't regulate, of course, is where that food comes from,
mm.
uh, how it's sourced, and what additional ingredients they might be putting into it that satisfy something, but not necessarily great for the cat.
Wow. So what kind of proteins are they putting in our cat food? Like I know I see on the can it'll say fish or chicken. I mean, I guess that's what they're doing. So basically feeding them what we would feed a dog. I mean, it's not natural for a cat to eat a fish, is it?
Well, yeah, not really, kind of. I mean, there are cats, the Greek Isles, they do catch fish in some contexts, and but it's not always healthy, right?
Mhm.
And some cats don't react well to fish protein. Some may develop allergies to it or an intolerance to it. And in fact, any ingredient can produce an intolerance in a cat if it doesn't work right for them. What's what unfortunately cat what food manufacturers can so put into cat food and into dog food is animal proteins that we wouldn't eat ourselves,
Okay.
right?
Leftovers.
And when in the United States, it's legal if a cow can walk in, even though it's sick, if it can still technically walk, it can be turned into food for humans,
Mhm.
even if they maybe cut out the parts that are not good. And so what is a standard? I'm not an expert. I should just say I'm not an expert on the cat food industry. Um, but it is possible to source proteins that are kind of disgusting,
Yeah.
and that you wouldn't want for yourself, your family, or for your animals. So then that brings up the question of how do you pick cat food? But
Yeah.
it's a big subject.
It is for sure. So,
And I brought some cat food, by the way,
okay.
to show you at one point.
Okay, good. So now we understand that's fantastic and incredible information. I mean, you just blow my mind with the stuff because I didn't even realize that cats can't even digest vegetables. Like that's wow, that's something we don't even know. So this is really important that they're getting the right. Like this isn't a dog. Dogs are a little bit more like garbage pails, right? They kind of can take whatever they can, there's things that we need to avoid, but with a cat, it's definitely a more fine-tuned diet. And something that I think is important that you shared with me is the ratio. A lot of people either only feed kibble to their cat, or they're feeding kibble and some wet food. And I think a lot of people get the ratio wrong on that. I know I had it wrong. So I would typically feed pile of kibble. Here's all your kibble, all the kibble you want, and then here's a little bit of wet food. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And it's funny, I will sometimes say to people, there's no kibble bush in nature.
Yeah.
Kibble doesn't grow, like berries that you can pluck. It's not something that cats evolved to eat. Basically dehydrated food, which by virtue of its composition does not have as much meat protein in it as wet food. It also doesn't have very much water for obvious
Mhm.
reasons, and
Mhm.
so we're potentially, dehydrating our cats a little bit, stressing their kidneys a little bit over a long period of time if they get a lot of dry food. We
Mhm.
know that for cats, the kidneys are probably the weakest organ. It's, if nothing takes your cat towards end of life conditions, if nothing else takes your cat, kidney disease will eventually
Yeah.
rear its head.
Yeah.
And they're desert animals. They get their water. There's a tough relationship between cats and water, and so we want them to get a lot of water in their diet, and we want them to get extra protein, and we also want them to try and eat what nature intended them to eat. And if we just plop the dry food down, we're also kind of turning them into grazers, something we maybe talked about before, where we're kind of interrupting the cycle of predation. They're not having to go after a specific meal at a specific time. They just can go and eat and munch and walk away and come back and munch. And then they may be bored. And if they're bored, they may be pestering us for activities that they wouldn't pester us for if they were more engaged and if they had to think about when their meal was and then get it and get the satisfaction of that. But yeah, I always encourage more wet food, less dry food. Some people don't feed dry food at all, which is fine, right?
Mhm.
Great. Um, but if you're going to feed, I wouldn't, I generally don't think you should feed dry food exclusively. It's not going to kill your cat, but it's not super helpful. Um, and uh, and if I was going to feed both, I'd try and feed more wet at specific times of the day. Generally at least twice a day.
Okay.
Cats, hunt in nature 5 or 6 times a day. So we're not going to feed them 6 times a day, but one meal a day kind of is at the opposite end of what they would normally do in nature.
Right. Okay. So you said you've got a can there. Can you show us?
I've got a couple things.
Yeah, show me a
Yeah.
can and
Although,
sorry, I'm just curious about portion. Like, how much of a can should I be giving? I mean, I argue with my husband all the time. He wants to give them a tiny little quarter, and I'm like, give them the whole can.
so, that's a great question that for me doesn't have an objective answer. I've never understood the feeding directions on cat food. If your cat weighs this, feed them this amount. Well, when I read those packages, it's like, oh my, if I feed my cat that much food, he's going to turn into a balloon. Do they just want me to overfeed? And then the directions, of course, don't take into account that you might be feeding. If the feeding directions are for wet food, they're not taking into account the fact that you're feeding dry food as well.
Right.
So you have to balance that. The food I was just going to show you, and I'm not endorsing any particular food, but this is a relatively new food called Cat Person. My shelter got a big donation of this.
Ooh.
And it's really well sourced. And it's cooked in, I believe it is manufactured in facilities that are FDA approved. I'd have to double check on that. It comes in a small little container like this,
Okay.
which is just under 3 ounces. So in cat food cans, there's the small cans like Fancy Feast.
Mm-hmm.
Those are 3 ounce. And then there's the big cans that look like tuna fish cans, and those are 5.5 ounce. And you can also get like bigger 10 or 12
Yes.
ounce cans of cat food and save money that way. But I kind of look at, in terms of portion size, first, I want to figure out what the cat's appetite is, and see if I can satisfy the cat's appetite without overfeeding.
Right.
So, right, because that's a negotiation. Because hunger and appetite are two different things. And if a cat's appetite is much larger than its hunger, then I might be overfeeding. So I need to pay attention to that. But some cats will eat a quarter can at a meal, and that is actually adequate, because if you give them more, they won't eat it. And other cats want like a much larger portion, like a half a can or a whole can. And so if I was getting a cat, bringing a cat home, and if I didn't know from the shelter or the rescue organization what this cat was eating and how much they were eating, I would start by giving a little bit more than what the cat might finish. So I know what the cat's normal portion is. This is how much I eat. Thank you very much. I don't need more than this.
Okay.
And if they leave some behind, then I'm like, okay, 1/3 of a can seems to be what he or she wants. And why don't we start with that? Let's start with what they want. And then, of course, there's issues of palatability, and am I feeding a food that my cat likes? Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they might be eating or not eating because either it tastes like McDonald's and they want to overeat, or it tastes really super refined and maybe they don't want to eat as much because it's not as McDonald's like.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that's good. Just kind of watching your cat. I think, indoor cats and watching their weight is really important. My guys go outside, they're very active. So they can eat a can each. And they're, kind of
Mhm.
almost trying to eat each other's food because they're busy and they're not overweight at all. They're nice and lean. I like keep all my animals lean. It's just better for them. So my second, or I guess I have many questions, but then my next question I want to talk about, which seems to be more new on the market, is raw food. Raw got really big with dogs. It really exploded. Lots of people are on raw with their dogs. And then I've started to notice on the market now raw food for cats. Do you know much about that? How do we feel about this? Is this a good transition?
So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I found that veterinarians tend to be a little bit worried about raw food because
Mm-hmm.
they're worried
Yeah.
about bacterial contamination like E. coli.
Mhm.
And that's being addressed in the raw food arena. As an example, Stella and Chewy's, which we can put a link up afterwards. It is a raw food that is pressure sterilized. I didn't even know what pressure sterilization was until I started researching this company. Pressure sterilization is when you take a food, and we do this with human food all the time. It's in the package that you're going to purchase. You know, it's a dozen hot dogs in a shrink wrapped plastic container. And they jam all this food, whatever the food that they're sterilizing, into a container of water that is then compressed. And because it's all, the pressure is coming from all directions at the same time, it doesn't smush the food. So when it comes out, the hot dogs look just fine because they are just fine. But the pressure is so intense that any bacteria has been destroyed.
Wow.
And so this is great because it remains raw. It's bacterially safe. And then that particular company hires a second company that is not connected to them at all, and hires this company to do spot testing of their food for contamination.
Okay.
So I think my answer to your question is, if you can get a raw diet that is by one method or another is guaranteed to be free of bacterial contamination, then I'm all for it. There's a lot to be said for it. There's more nutrients, right? Because when you cook, you are going to destroy nutrients. So there's more digestible food. And it also contains delicate nutrients that might be destroyed in the cooking process. There have been studies done on cats that suggest very strongly, I think these studies were good, the ones that I looked at, that show that cats can medically benefit. Some cats with inflammatory bowel disease improve when fed. There was a study done where cats were actually fed ground up rabbit. And they actually, so as not to cause an imbalance to the study, a bias, they didn't decide what part of the rabbit to grind up and what part to leave out. So they just did the whole thing from the fur to the internal organs and the bones, and they just fed that, and cats improved. So I'm all for it if your cat will eat it, right?
Yeah.
That always brings up the question of, what if my cat won't eat what I'm offering?
Yeah, which brings us to a pretty common problem that people have, right? Is when you're trying to get transition, and I say it's like a child. If your kid's only been eating McDonald's and now you want them to eat broccoli and lettuce, they're really going to put their foot down and say no, and there's some tricks to that. It's interesting you're saying about the rabbit. I just want to talk about that because my cats, like I said, go out, and my old cat, that Charlie, that was almost 19, died a few weeks ago. He used to catch rabbits all the time. Like that was his delicacy. And he would very specifically eat their heads or their brains and leave the rest. And then, or it would be like somewhere in the middle of the body. It was like he knew, this is the piece I need. And then he would leave kind of the rest of it. The other day, my cats caught a rather large rabbit. I was surprised how big it was, and they ate a little bit of it. Like, we're so graphic here, but this is life, right? This is wildlife, or not wildlife, but this is how they live. And they left the majority of the rabbit, and I just gave it to the dog. I was like, here you go, dog. I mean, it's organic, free range rabbit. It couldn't get any more pure and healthy for my dog. And he loved it. He sat out there and he ate every little bit of it. So that worked out rather well. But a lot of people have indoor cats that aren't catching their own food and sort of looking after themselves in that sense. So trying raw food, or at least trying to get your cat onto a better grade of food, moving from McDonald's to a salad, that is a challenge. And so maybe you could share with us some tips on how to transition our cat from this poor choice of diet into something that's going to be better for them.
Sure. And I just have to say, excuse me for a second, because nature is intruding. I'm having a little bit of an allergy. It's not time of the year. So I had to take a little lozenge. And so I apologize for that. So, if we stuff human food with sugar and salt, we're going to like it. It's just addictive.
Yeah.
Our kids are going to like it. And if we look at the sugar and salt content of processed foods, it's astronomical. And what also blows my mind, Jen, is when you look at a processed food that contains both high quantities of salt and sugar, and that's to disguise the fact that there's sugar, they add a lot of salt. And to disguise the salt, they add a lot of sugar.
Oh, geez.
So that they kind of balance themselves out. But right, but it's crazy. So the sugar content on cat food is very low. Cats don't really seem to have any preference for sweet, but and they do have a little preference for salt. We think that is because here we're getting graphic again. Blood is very salty, right? And also, I'll just mention, interestingly, if you ever watch a cat eat a mouse, they eat them head first.
Yeah.
Because they want to eat in the direction of the coat. So they don't want the fur going the wrong direction like needles down their esophagus. They want the direction of everything to slide down in a really nice way.
Oh.
So right. So they're working it.
Yeah.
But cat food does contain, it does contain all sorts of tasty ingredients from their point of view. And I'd even mentioned that in a veterinary or shelter environment, we actually have a term for food that we use for cats who don't want to eat because they're either stressed or they aren't feeling well. And I think it's a universal term in the shelter and veterinary world, and that's called yummy food. And you'll even see signage, this cat gets yummy food.
Okay.
And it's a euphemism, for not really great food. And so one approach, if you have a cat who has a protein preference, right? Cat who loves chicken, and you're going to try and start feeding them beef or lamb or fish, you're already up against the problem. So first, let's see if the cat has a protein preference, and then start mixing in a better food a little bit.
Okay.
With humans, if you decide that broccoli is really tasty, it may be because it wasn't tasty the first time you ate it, but you developed, it became tasty over time. And there are lots of foods that we as adults know that we like now that we maybe didn't like as kids, and it requires exposure. So if we put a little bit of a better food in with our cat's diet and they don't really notice it, but it's there, over time, we start adding a little bit more. This is also respectful of their digestive systems, because if you change a wet food on a cat dramatically and quickly, you often will get digestive trouble in the form of loose stool. And so whenever someone's taking a cat home from the shelter and we say we're feeding this. If you want to change, that's fine, but we suggest you do it over the course of about a week, and that you monitor their stool as you do it. In terms of high quality food, it's the same process, slowly mixing in the better quality food over the course of a week or two. Okay. What sometimes happens is that you get to a certain proportion of the better food versus the junk food, and the cat goes, I know what you're up to. You thought you could fool me.
Yeah.
Right. And then you may have to slow down, back up, and go slower. But that just means that you're probably going too quickly. And if you slow down, back up a little bit, slow down, you can still get there. And you may have to experiment with different quality foods. Another food that I think is a good quality food is weruva.
Oh, yes,
this is in a pouch.
Yes, I get that.
And
cat.
If you look at ingredients, you see things like whole proteins, tuna broth, tuna, salmon. Then there's some tapioca starch and some sunflower oil. And then it's basically vitamins and minerals. And when you see other ingredients, when you see things like byproducts and things like, that it's not just the protein, it's a protein something.
Yeah.
then you're potentially getting, there's nothing wrong with organ meat. Cats eat organs. But when the food starts to become highly processed and no longer is legally allowed to be called the protein by itself, then you're dealing with something else. And maybe
Oh, okay.
you don't want to give that to your cat.
Oh, that's a good tip. That's a good way to look at it. Okay. Awesome.
And some cat food is manufactured in plants that are in fact FDA approved. So you could technically, the food is considered fit for human consumption, even if you wouldn't necessarily enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good rule to go by too is and this is kind of the same way with human food. It seems like the healthier a food is, the more expensive it is, which is just wrong in my opinion, but that's for another day. But cheap food is cheap food. Like it is cheap for a reason, because you're getting, these byproducts that aren't even really what you think they are. So reading the ingredients is really important to know what's going on, what you're eating. Understanding what your cat likes and doesn't like it's a really good point there. And I, my husband fishes, and he'll be gutting the fish, and he'll take out like the heart or something, and he would give it to the cats, and the cats just, they do love organs. And I just, it's something that I always say to people, particularly more with dogs, is that there's no such thing as people food and then dog food. It's all food, and dogs particularly need a good variety of food, fruits, vegetables, and protein. And it should be human quality. It's nothing wrong with sharing the same food with these animals, because it's all the same. Food is food. There's no such thing as people versus animal. I mean, yeah, you're human, aren't going to run out and eat a mouse, but sharing your organs, if you're digesting, or you're, a hunter and you're butchering, saving all of these things for your animals, it's really good. It's beneficial for them to have real food that hasn't been highly or overly processed. So I think this is this is helpful. This is good, because I know a lot of people struggle with getting their cats onto something better for them. Like you already mentioned, kidney disease is the number one problem with cats. It's the number one reason cats are in the vet is kidney. And
And inflammatory bowel disease is another
is
thing,
another one. Yes.
which is basically an immune response to food ingredients and proteins in particular. And it's not, the cause is not well understood, but if there's one thing I kind of am always in favor of, is less ingredients, not more ingredients.
Yeah.
If every extra ingredient is another thing that our cat has to deal with, and inflammatory bowel disease is a serious concern.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
sorry, I interrupted.
no, that's fine. It's a good point. And kibble is, as you said, it's dehydrated. So what that means is that the animal requires to use their moisture, their hydration, to digest it. So they're actually using a lot of moisture from their body just to digest kibble. And if you don't supplement them with wet food, you can't take a cat and force it to drink something, same with dogs. So if you're going to feed kibble, I sometimes recommend to people add water to it, just give them the extra moisture.
Yep. And one of the things about cats being desert animals is that they also evolved to get their water from the animals they ate, because there weren't lots of standing supplies of water, right? Because it just wasn't there. And a lot of people say, hey, I don't see my cat drinking water. And the explanation is, the evolutionary explanation for this is, they're not used to drinking water out of a bowl. They're used to just getting the water from the food that they eat. And some cats really get most of their water from the wet food that they eat. And if you just feed them dry food, they'll obviously drink if they're really thirsty, but they might not compensate 100%. So there might be slightly dehydrated, which long-term means that their urine is concentrating in a way that's maybe stressing out their kidneys.
Yes.
Not being flushed.
Yes. And it's a pretty good indication too if your cat all of a sudden starts drinking excessively, and all of a sudden you're thinking, wow, the cat's drinking a lot of water. That's a really good indication that there's something wrong in their digestive system, particularly the kidneys. We've got,
Yep.
diabetes. These are all signs that you maybe want to take your cat over to the vet and have them checked out, because excessive water drinking is a really good sign in a cat that something's going wrong.
And on another similar issue, slightly differently, a cat who is ravenously hungry but appearing to lose weight
Mm,
is requires a vet visit. The most common cause would be hyperthyroidism, and a simple blood test can determine that, and it's really inexpensive to treat. Just a pill once a day. Sometimes even a prescription food can control it.
nice. Okay. That's good. That's good to know. Or also, if your cats are outside, if you're a farm and have outdoor cats, worms are common. We have to deworm
Mm.
our cats once, maybe even twice a year. We do it because if you do start to see weight loss, but they continue to eat, there's some issues there. That, and again, totally treatable. We prefer to let our animals outside and eat rodents, which causes this problem that you have to treat with dewormer, which is not a big deal. So it's just, some things are very easy to address and treat. You just got to pay attention to how your cat's behaving, and difference in their behaviors. If you start to see changes, something's going on.
Yep.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think this was really very helpful. I hope a lot of people took a lot away from this. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
Just briefly, if one really great way of monitoring your cat's health, especially as they get older, that you can do at home, is to get a digital baby scale and weigh your cat, once a week, once every 2 weeks, and keep a log. The weight fluctuates. You'll always see a little fluctuation, just like with people, weights go up and down a little bit. But if you start to see a trend, if a cat loses weight 3 times in a row, even the smallest amount, even an ounce, but if it's
Okay.
6 consecutive losses, one change doesn't count as anything. 2 losses in a row is notable, and 3 losses or 3 gains in a row indicates a trend, and trends
Mm.
aren't good. They indicate that something's going on. If it's weight gain, then it's not necessarily an illness issue, but it can produce a larger cat. But if it's weight loss, then you can potentially catch an illness well before it would be caught at a vet's office,
Just by
if you do this.
monitoring the weight. That's amazing.
Yep.
Great information. Okay. Good to know. Good
Because
to know.
the amount of time, the amount of weight loss it takes to be observable to your naked eye, by the time you've seen that, your cat's probably well into something.
Oh, that okay. Yeah, because they're so small to begin with. You need to monitor it with a
Right.
scale. Okay, that is fantastic. Great stuff. This is great. So thank you so much, Stephen, for this. If anybody wants to, get some more assistance with their cat, their diet, their health, want to see where they're at, we're going to put our links down in the description so you can contact Stephen for some cat help. He is incredible and amazing, as you can tell from all of these videos and the information he shares. So thank you, Stephen, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. It's always such a pleasure, and you're just a great resource for so many things connected to animals, cats and dogs, and horses too.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks.
and so, thank you.
And thank you. We'll talk to you again.